The hypocrisy and U-turning exhibited by energy and environment ministers lately, and that's federally and at a state level, has been breathtaking. And watching it all and shaking his head, no doubt, has been New South Wales One Nation leader Mark Latham. He joins us right now. Good to see you, Mark.
G'day, Chris. Good to be here.
In an energy market that has collapsed under years of strain, of course, 5 minutes after the Morrison government left office, I watched Angus Taylor on Sky News this morning refuse to take any responsibility whatsoever for the crisis. He has to be joking, doesn't he?
Well, both federal and state governments over the last 10 years are responsible, Chris, because Australians are obviously asking an important question, and that is, how did we once have, not so long ago, the cheapest and most reliable electricity in the world? And it's when the Greens, in the formal Green Party, the Green part of the Labor Party, and Greens like Matt Keane started to tamper with the system, that it's gone belly up. And the damage that's been caused in the past week, of course, doesn't just relate to escalating power bills and pensioners too scared to put their heating on because of the cost of it. Who would invest in New South Wales, for example? What manufacturing or even retail company would invest in New South Wales when you've got this galah, Matt Keane, in charge of the system, where he told the ABC last year all the fossil fuels needed to be gone by the mid-2030s. He has been greener than the Greens, tealer than the Teals in trying to drive coal out, and then last week had the absolute humiliation and backflip, a triple somersault, of having to declare delivery of coal to be an essential service in New South Wales to keep the lights on. The basic truth is, Chris, if they hadn't touched the power system, if they hadn't been so deluded in thinking that Australia with 1.3% of global emissions could save the planet, then we wouldn't have these problems. That is just so obvious.
Exactly. And no one, and I've said this to you before, in my view, has come up with the document that says, in the year X, on the date Y, we will be able to transition onto renewables, which can sufficiently and logistically, practically hang on to baseload power for us, and we'll be able to keep the lights on. No one dares to do a calculation like that, Mark, because they're too scared it might be 50 years from now.
Oh, well, that's a really good point, Chris. And actually, we've gained some documents in the New South Wales Upper House showing that Matt Keane's much vaunted renewable energy zones won't bring anything into the system until at least 2026. All the talk about pumped hydro for storage, keeping the lights on when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, that at minimum is 2027. And then you've got all the construction risks of having to build dams when New South Wales hasn't built a dam in 30 years. So we've got massive problems on the horizon here. If people think the last fortnight has been bad, it will get worse, particularly if we have a hot summer at the end of this year. But the real pinch point here, the documents show, is in 2026, where with Snowy 2.0 delayed, blackouts are almost inevitable. With the closing of Eraring in 2025, the closing of Liddell Power Station next year, Matt Keane and his wacky plan hasn't got the replacement power in place. And this, again, was just common sense, wasn't it? To turn the electricity grid upside down with Keane's so-called green energy revolution, well, maybe you could do it over 30 or 40 years, but not in 10. Not
Exactly.
in 10 without taking huge risks and massive damage to the economy. When the lights go out, it will cause huge social and economic damage in our country. And we know the guilty parties.
Spot on. Prayers alone will not create a transition to renewables. And I'm looking at Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen federally. He still won't contemplate coal. He sort of loosely said everything's on the table, and then he's gone last week and said, no, we're not going down the additional coal facility track. He won't talk about nuclear, but he's talking about big nuclear power generators. We are talking about, hang on, surely we need to speak about modular small reactors. They don't even want to have a conversation about that. Again, you can demonise all this stuff as much as you want, but until you face up to the realities, we are in for blackouts again.
Well, and you've only got to look at Europe, Chris, to learn from that example. And that's been a standout example for the past 18 months. Boris Johnson, who tried to embrace the climate change agenda, is now ordering dozens of small nuclear reactors to get them in place to provide the baseload power. Because it's just a basic reality that solar and wind can't keep the lights on 24/7. So you need the backup. And if it doesn't come from pumped hydro, which is exceptionally unlikely, You need to keep the coal going, the gas going, and build the nuclear so you've got reliable baseload power to provide the essential service for the people. I mean, they sort of treat this electricity system like it's some optional thing you can buy down the lolly shop.
Yes.
It's the thing that's the total backbone of our entire economy and our society. And to tamper with it this way has been so reckless and irresponsible. Look at Europe and understand they're backtracking to nuclear, to coal, to gas, and Australia should be doing the same.
Not wrong. You're exactly right. I want to talk about education quickly. Premier Dominic Perrottet, New South Wales, has flagged major changes to education, including the introduction of performance pay for teachers. Now, the union won't like their teachers being paid on their success or their failure, but that's how the rest of us survive.
Yeah, if teaching wants to be a modern, successful profession, it needs to modernise. It needs to come up to date. And in every decent profession, highly paid, well rewarded, they have performance pay. And why shouldn't the teachers adding value in the class and producing good outcomes for the next generation, why shouldn't they be the heroes of our society, getting performance bonuses for that great service to New South Wales? So I applaud what Perrottet is doing. He's wasting money with that ridiculous flag on the bridge, of course, when there's many more pressing Indigenous problems. But on performance pay, he's trying to bring the teaching profession into the 21st century.
Can you imagine $25 million for a community that can't flush toilets properly or doesn't have hot and cold running water, and there are places in our country that don't have those basic facilities?
Well, Chris, I could list many scores of Indigenous problems, particularly in the west of the state, that need to be solved before spending an outrageous $25 million and laughing about it for a flag on a bridge, which doesn't help anyone, other than sort of the politics of the war in a globe. There's the school at Walgett, which is a sinkhole of violence and dysfunction, where people are leaving, families are leaving Walgett to get away from it, and other families, including Indigenous, are busing their kids an hour to Lightning Ridge to avoid a school that's failed hopelessly. Why don't we use the money, or part of it, $25 million, to bring in the best teachers to get that school back on its feet so that people don't have to evacuate the township of Walgett?
Yeah, the flagpole's an insult. Great to have you on the program, Mark. Thank you very much. Enjoy your week.
You too. Thanks, Chris.